across a big open room that served as reception area, training ground, and gym all in one, part of which was still on fire. I assumed that was why I was suddenly the focus of half the eyes in the place. That was better than when I'd first been assigned here 9 months ago, and the stairs had been for a different reason. Part Fae were not all that strange in the War Mage Corps. Maybe 5% of the whole had some kind of unusual blood in their veins, although it was often so far back as to manifest as nothing more than a faint tinge of blue or green along a cheekbone, or better than average sight in the dark. Wares, on the other hand, were a lot less thick on the ground. Of course, we weren't supposed to be on the ground, at least not wearing a war mage uniform. But my father was Lia de Croissets, from a family with a long history of service to the Corps, and many times decorated for his service. He was retired now, but when he'd announced that his daughter Akalia was going to follow in his footsteps, no one had had the gall to tell him no. Or the courage, probably. Dad had a temper. Something he'd passed down to me, along with my dark brown hair and lanky 5'9" build. But my gray eyes were wolf eyes, my mother's eyes, and while they looked human enough, I'd heard that they were hard to meet. Which was probably why a couple of nearby gawkers scurried off when I sent them the glare they deserved, before following Hargroves downstairs, and started to get nervous. The Corps' new digs were in a decrepit 13,000-square-foot warehouse on an arid bit of desert in the vicinity of Nellis Air Force Base. Or at least the upper level was. It was mainly taken up by administrative offices, training areas, and housing for new recruits, while the newly excavated subterranean sections hid the harder-to-explain stuff, like the interspecies medical facilities, weapons storage, and labs. And the lockup, which was where it looked like we were headed. Sir, I said, wondering why my new students were already incarcerated. That usually took a few weeks at least. But Hargroves wasn't listening. "Open up," he snapped at the guard standing on either side of a large metal door. Considering the types of wards draped over it, I didn't know why they were there at all. It could have withstood a nuclear blast, much less an escape attempt. Not that the junkies, scammers, and drunks that made up most of its current residents warranted that kind of precaution. But then it hadn't been made for them. It had been made for them, I thought, after we passed through the door and down a corridor, only to stop in front of a large, well-warded cell. And suddenly, I caught a clue. I also caught Hargrove's eyes, which were looking almost pleased for once, and forgot about my resolution about not pissing off the boss, because he certainly hadn't made a similar one. "You have got to be freaking kidding me!" A couple of very long hours later, I pulled my Harley into my driveway, only to find a similar bike already there. The sleek crotch rocket was parked alongside a battered pickup, with a ladder and some paint buckets sitting in the back. I suddenly felt better. I let myself into the house, which looked less like a war zone than it had for months. A previous issue with another class of students had utterly trashed the place. It wasn't their fault. A mage had used their inexperience to enthrall them and then send them against me, resulting in a fight where I was caught between not wanting to kill my students and not wanting to die at their hands. The result had been the almost destruction of my brand-new house, something my boyfriend was trying to rectify. And looking good doing it. Not that Cyrus ever looked less than edible, but in an old tank riding up to show off sculpted abs and paint-splattered jeans clinging to a better backside than any man deserved, he was stunning, enough to make me pause in the doorway in admiration. He heard me, of course. I hadn't inherited my mother's super-sharp senses, but Cyrus had the full wolfly package. He'd heard me drive up. Hell, he'd probably heard my bike from a dozen blocks away, and he'd smelled me before I hit the door. Yet he didn't turn around. He just kept painting my living room wall with the tasteful soft beige I'd picked out, the smooth movement of the roller